Our tale from Trench Crusade today takes us to New Antioch, where the guns beyond the walls never seemed to cease, and keeping the home of all our hopes alive required men willing to stand between hunger and authority. Enforcer Correntin Draus believed every disturbance had a cause, every prisoner had a destination, and every order had been written for a reason, until the same small mark began appearing on people who were never meant to meet. People beyond New Antioch imagined a church enforcer spent his days hunting witches. I wish they had been right. Witches were simple. You found the forbidden chamber, the painted circle, the animal born with a man's teeth. You called the office of doctrine, barred the doors, and waited for people with better armor and less imagination to arrive. If the witch ran, you shot her. If the circle spoke, you did not answer. There were rules. Most of my work concerned bread, coal, lamp oil, room permits, missing ration cards, unpaid burial fees, disputed queue positions, factory bells rung at the wrong hour, pilgrim wagons blocking ammunition roads, soldiers who mistook leave for license, and respectable men who believed a donation to the church had purchased them the right to break a poorer man's jaw. My name was Correntin Draus. At the time this account began, I was 39 years old and a senior constable of the 3rd Ecclesiastical Ward, Southern Civil Order Office. I had served 14 years. My coat was black, my badge was brass, and neither had remained clean for more than an hour in all that time. We were called church enforcers because every lawful authority in New Antioch was, at some point, a church authority. The words sounded grander than the work. We did not march in iron capirotes or carry reliquaries into no man's land. We wore boiled leather under wool, steel helmets with a small cross above the brow, and white armbands so soldiers could distinguish us from whichever civilians they had decided to hit. Our weapons were a short service revolver, a baton of ash bound with copper wire, and a whistle whose principal purpose was to summon 3 more underpaid men into the same difficulty. I had arrested murderers with the revolver. I had settled more arguments by showing people the whistle. The 3rd Ward ran from the ash markets below the Cathedral Hill to the southern foundries, then east through the pilgrim hostels and the old aqueduct quarter. 40,000 permanent souls lived there, if the census could be believed, and perhaps another 20,000 arrived and departed in any given month. They came from Poland, Ethiopia, Ireland, Armenia, the Levant, Germania, Francia, and countries whose remaining land could be crossed without taking off one's boots. They brought saints in boxes, grudges inherited from grandfathers, foreign prayers, empty purses, and the immovable conviction that New Antioch would recognize the sacrifice they had made merely by reaching it. New Antioch recognized production. If a person made shells, carried water, treated wounds, dug graves, copied orders, washed uniforms, repaired engines, or gave birth to someone likely to do one of those things, the city found a space for them. If they could not, the city found a queue. The Civil Order Office occupied a former bathhouse beside the chapel of St. Caddoc the Wakeful. The bathing pools had been floored with planks and divided into desks. The old hot room served as our cells. Steam no longer ran through the clay pipes, but the walls retained heat from the adjoining bakery, so prisoners emerged from a night's detention smelling of sweat and sanctity. Each morning began at the assignment board. Captain Odran Hesse stood before it with a mug of chicory and read the night register while 20 constables buckled equipment and lied about being awake. Hesse was a compact man with a gray mustache clipped so evenly that I suspected he measured it. He had lost 2 fingers on his left hand during the siege of the Eastern Bastion and disliked any object that required 5. He used a 4-column duty book, dealt cards in groups of 4, and once ordered a carpenter to remake a 5-hook coat rack at the carpenter's own expense. This was the sort of detail enforcers noticed about superiors. A man's theology mattered less at 6 in the morning than the direction in which he was likely to become unreasonable. My regular partner was Constable Thomas Ryle, 9 years younger than me and permanently hungry. Thomas could make friends in a bread riot, remember a face after one glance, and sleep sitting upright in a prisoner cart. He could not fill out an arrest form without blots. "Ink is evidence of effort," he told me. "Ink is evidence you should not be allowed near ink." He was eating an onion when I arrived that morning. Not bread with onion. An onion, peeled like an apple. "Your wife has expelled you again," I said. "Lida says onions cleanse the lungs." "Lida says that because she does not have to share an office with your lungs." He offered me a bite. I declined. At the clerk's desk, Berenice Sue sorted the overnight papers into piles which determined, more accurately than doctrine, how the ward would spend its day. Berenice was a lay sister of no professed order, with cropped black hair, iron spectacles, and a damaged right foot she dragged half an inch behind the left. She never asked prisoners what they had done. She asked arresting constables whether they had used the correct code. "Draus," she said without looking up, "you still owe me the disposition chit for the aqueduct thieves." Transferred to labor review. That is a sentence, not a document. The transport clerk took all 3. Then the transport clerk possesses my document. I shall arrest him. Bring back the chit first. Hesse struck the assignment board with the wooden pointer he used in place of his missing fingers. Attend. Night report. 2 stabbings in the Varangian hostel, both devotional and therefore recorded as accidents. A lamp oil store was burgled on Censor Street. Pilgrims from the procession of the Bleeding Crown have occupied St. Bartholomew's fountain because a local laundress washed stockings in it. Doctrine says the fountain has never been consecrated. The pilgrims say doctrine has been infiltrated. By stockings? Thomas asked. You may ask them. Thomas stopped smiling. Hesse continued. The southern districts are unsettled. Ammunition allocations rose again last night. Foundry 32 failed the revised quota. Management dismissed the second shift. Workers have gathered at the gates. The room changed. Men stopped fastening buckles and began checking them. A strike was not merely a labor matter in New Antioch. The guns beyond the walls required ammunition. Ammunition required factories. Factories required bodies. If the bodies refused, the front interpreted their refusal in dead men. How many? I asked. 400 outside. More inside. No confirmed weapons. Who has jurisdiction? We do until somebody fires. Then the military discovers an interest. He assigned 12 constables, 2 prisoner wagons, and a medical cart. That told me he expected negotiation. If he had expected peace, he would have sent 6. If he had expected slaughter, he would have sent soldiers. Draus commands, Hesse said. Rill with him. Keep the ammunition road clear. Restore the first shift if possible. Arrest named agitators only. Do not allow the crowd to enter the powder stores. Berenice held up a sheaf of pale blue paper. Transfer chits. Optimistic, Thomas said. Prepared, she replied. The chits were quarter sheets printed at the central duplicating office. Each had spaces for prisoner name, charge, health, property, receiving authority, and final destination. The standard form carried a cross watermark visible against light. These did not. Instead, in the lower corner of each, 5 short lines met around an empty center. Not a star exactly, more like 5 tally marks leaning inward. New printer? I asked. Berenice looked at the mark. Overflow stock from central custody. We were issued 2 bundles. I've not seen it before. You have now. She pushed them into my hand. I remember the paper because it was thick. Age preserves its own evidence. There were rituals before we went into a crowd, not church rituals. Those came later, when a chaplain blessed the wounded or explained why the dead had been fortunate. Ours were practical superstitions accumulated by men who had stood in front of thrown bricks. We removed keys, spectacles, and loose insignia. A crowd could pull a man down by anything it could grip. We tied cords through our whistles and tucked them beneath our collars. Revolvers remained holstered with the retaining straps closed. A drawn pistol changed a gathering into a battlefield even before it fired. Battens went through the left loop because the right hand might need to seize a wrist, carry a child, or stop a companion drawing his pistol too early. Irina inspected every man's equipment by touch. She found a cracked buckle on Constable Jahan's helmet and made him exchange it. Jahan protested that the crack was superficial. Irina struck the helmet once against the assignment table. The buckle split and the helmet rolled across the floor. "Superficially dead," she said. Tomas collected our identity discs. We wore them in ordinary duty, but in a crush the cords became little garrots. He threaded all 12 onto a bootlace and gave them to Berenice. She counted them twice. "You expect 12 back?" Thomas asked. "I expect 12 reports," she said. "What returns inside the coats is Captain Hess's concern." Berenice maintained a shelf of small wooden boxes behind her desk. Each bore a constable's name. Mine contained a spare shirt, 2 letters from my sister, 4 ducats for burial expenses, and a note stating which parish should receive my boots. Thomas's contained a comb, a deck of obscene playing cards, and nothing his wife would need. "Put money in it," I told him. "If I die, Lida receives a pension. If you die in authorized service after the finding confirms no misconduct. You make marriage sound less risky than employment." "It usually is." He placed his onion in the box. "For Lida," he said. Hesse watched these preparations from the board. He pretended not to. Captains disliked acknowledging that routine duty might become fatal because then every assignment acquired the weight of a decision. Before we departed, Father Caddock's curate entered carrying a brass sprinkler and a bowl of gray water. The water had blessed 3 squads already. It contained wool fibers, soot, and 1 dead fly. We bowed our heads. "May your hands be firm," the curate said. Water struck my helmet. "May your eyes distinguish the innocent." It struck my sleeve. "May your obedience preserve the city." That drop struck my mouth. Outside, our driver waited beside the prisoner wagons. His name was Abel Montfort, a former cavalryman whose left leg had been replaced below the knee with an iron peg. He treated the wagons as if they were horses, and the horses as if they were superior officers. "Axle on 2 is complaining," he said. "About what?" "Weight it has not carried yet." He made us listen. When he rocked the wagon, the rear axle gave a faint wooden click. "That is dry," Tomas said. "That is prophecy," Abel replied. We transferred the medical kit and restraint chest to Wagon 1. Abel refused to take the suspect wagon until a wheelwright examined it. A younger officer might have overruled him to save time. Experience consisted largely of learning which stubborn old men knew the future. We walked. The southern ward was fully awake. Night shift workers queued at bakeries beside morning shift workers buying breakfast. A platoon of communicants marched uphill in fresh bandages, singing too quickly because their sergeant feared they would lose courage if the hymn reached its final verse. Street sweepers pushed ash into gutters where children searched it for coal. Above us, laundry hung between buildings in colors no uniform regulation had yet abolished. Every 30 yards, someone wanted an enforcer. A widow caught my sleeve and demanded we arrest her landlord for moving the privy bucket beside her door. A shopkeeper claimed pilgrims had cursed his scales. 2 boys reported a severed hand in a drain. It proved to be a glove stuffed with sausage meat. At the junction of Copper Street, an old soldier saluted us with the wrong arm and asked whether the French had taken Jerusalem. "Not this morning," Thomas told him. "Then what are you hurrying for?" "To keep it that way." The old man considered this and saluted again. We did not solve any of those troubles. We wrote addresses on a slate and promised ward visits that might occur after the factories, the riots, the murders, the fires, and the end of the world. That was another thing outsiders misunderstood. Authority did not mean possessing enough power. It meant choosing which plea would remain unanswered. Foundry. 32 made shrapnel casings. It stood at the southern edge of the city where the streets widened for artillery tractors and every roof wore soot. The main building was a long brick nave roofed in corrugated iron. Furnace stacks rose behind it like blackened organ pipes. Above the entrance, a stone Christ held a shell in each hand. Someone had painted the wounds in his palms with red enamel. We heard the workers before we saw them. They beat lengths of iron against the gate in a slow, uneven rhythm. Not a song, a factory rhythm. 3 blows, pause, 2 blows, the old signal for a jammed press. Hundreds of voices answered each pause. No more names. 3 blows. No more names. The phrase meant nothing to me then. We left the wagons 2 streets away so the horses would not panic and approached on foot. Our white armbands drew curses. The workers filled the whole width of the avenue, men and women in leather aprons and scorched gloves, their faces gray with metal dust. Some had brought children. That was either a sign of peaceful intent or a way of making violence expensive. Thomas surveyed the roofs. "No bottles," he said. "Yet." Windows shut on the management side. "They expect bottles." Constable Irina Cole brought the squad into 2 lines across the ammunition road. Irina had served in a volunteer regiment before a mortar took the hearing from her left ear. She gave orders quietly because shouting sounded distorted to her. People leaned close to listen, which made her an excellent officer in crowds. I climbed onto a water trough. "Who speaks for this assembly?" 400 people shouted answers. I waited. Crowds hated silence more than authority. The shouting broke into smaller arguments, then subsided. A woman emerged from the gatehouse carrying a ledger wrapped in oilcloth. Her name, I learned, was Petra Knoll. She was perhaps 45, broad across the shoulders, her fair hair cut close to the scalp where sparks had singed it too often. The skin of her forearms showed old burns in every shape a factory could produce. She stopped 6 paces from the trough. "I speak for the casing line." "Do you speak for everyone?" "Nobody speaks for everyone. That's how we know we're not management." The crowd laughed. Some of my constables did too. "The road remains open," I said. "No person enters the powder buildings. No stones, no flame, no tools raised as weapons. Keep those rules and we talk." "We kept rules yesterday," Petra said. 6 people vanished. Dismissed workers left the premises. They did not go home. "Then where did they go?" She lifted the ledger. "Ask Overseer Lorne." The factory's chief overseer watched from an upper window. Casimir Lorne was a tall, fleshy man in an immaculate green coat with a silver respirator hanging unused at his chest like jewelry. He had sent 3 messages to our office before dawn. The first demanded troops. The second demanded priests. The third demanded that the workers be charged for the paper used in the first 2. "You will return to work while the complaint is examined," I said. "The quota kills 3 a week. The front kills more. Then send the front our machines. They can die operating them." Another murmur passed through the crowd. Petra opened the ledger. "Old quota was 1,100 casings per line. New quota is 1,600. Same coal, same shifts, same presses. Management writes failure against our ration records, then removes people for labor discipline." "Removes?" "Night van comes. Central custody seal. They take those whose names Lorne circles." No more names. I looked at the gatehouse. 6 last night? 4 from the line, 2 loaders who asked where they went. Arrested for what? Ask him. This was the first rule of an industrial disturbance. Do not negotiate facts through a crowd. A crowd turned every question into a promise. I told Petra to select 3 representatives. Thomas and I entered the factory with them while Irina held the road. Inside, work had stopped so suddenly that heat still lived in the machines. The casing presses stood in 2 rows, enormous iron frames driven by overhead shafts. Brass blanks waited in feed trays. A half-formed shell sat under one die, its open mouth crushed sideways. Oil crawled in rainbow skins across the floor. The silence was wrong. A factory had small sounds even when idle. Cooling metal ticking, belts settling, water hissing in jackets, rats disputing grain. 32 held its breath. Petra brought a machinist named Janek and an older furnace tender named Selwa. Janek would not remove his gloves. Selwa carried a string of black prayer beads and counted them continuously, 1 bead for every 10 steps. Lorne received us in the timekeeper's office rather than his own. He had 2 company guards beside him and Father Orsino Pell from the factory chapel. Father Pell was a gentle-looking priest with weak eyes. He held a handkerchief over his mouth against the dust, although every worker in the room breathed it without protection. "Constable Draus," Lorne said, "you were ordered to restore production." "I was ordered to restore it if possible." "It is possible. Remove the seditionists. 6 dismissed workers are unaccounted for." "Not my concern after dismissal." Petra threw the ledger onto the desk. "You signed their removal slips." Lorne did not look at it. "Disciplinary reassignment." "To where?" I asked. "Central Labor." "Charge?" "Quota sabotage. Defeatist speech. Incitement." "Destination?" "Central Labor determines destination." "Who collected them?" His annoyance deepened. "Central Labor." Answers which repeat the question usually conceal a person. I asked to see the removal slips. Lorne claimed they had gone with the prisoners. I asked for the duplicates. He said central clerks retained them. Berenice would have admired the neatness with which every document had become someone else's responsibility. Selwa stopped counting. "Show him your hands," Petra told Janek. The machinist stared at her. "Show him." He pulled off his right glove. On the center of his palm was a burn formed from 5 narrow lines. They pointed inward around a small, untouched circle. The wound was perhaps a week old. Its edges had been dusted black with metal filings. It resembled the mark on Berenice's transfer chits. "Machine injury?" I asked. Janek shook his head. Lorne said, "The workers have adopted it as a sign." "A union mark?" "A fetish. They press it into one another. That is why Father Pell is here." The priest lowered his handkerchief. "I found no doctrinal significance." Petra snatched off her own glove. The same mark crossed her palm, older and pale. Selwa showed hers without being asked. "Everyone on casing line 7, Petra said. "They marked us at the winter health inspection." "Who did?" "Men from Central." "Why?" "They said it meant our lungs had been examined." Lorne spread his hands. "You see? Administrative. They have built a grievance from a health measure." "Then where are the 6? He leaned towards me. "Senior Constable, the western batteries have rationed fire to 9 shells per gun. Men are dying because these people wish to debate clerical practice. Arrest the woman, ring the shift bell. Whatever concern remains can be examined while the presses operate." He was right about the batteries. A report on Hess's board had said the same. He was also lying. The 2 facts sat comfortably together. That was New Antioch's preferred arrangement. I asked to inspect line 7. Lorne objected. I inspected it. The line occupied the rear bay beside the quenching tanks. Its press was an older Recchione model with a replacement German drive shaft and guards repaired from devotional brass. I knew enough machinery to know a quota of 1,600 was possible for 1 hour, perhaps 2, if every blank fed cleanly and no one stopped for water. Across a 12-hour shift, it was arithmetic performed upon flesh. Thomas crouched beside the scrap bin. "Feed guide is worn." Petra nodded. "Reported 14 times. It will split 1 in 20. 1 in 17 yesterday." Every split blank counted against the line. The workers had to replace it without slowing the belt. Janek showed me where a woman's sleeve had been caught 3 days earlier. The emergency lever was wired upright. Who wired it? I asked. Maintenance, Lorne said. On whose order? Production Continuity Protocol. I pulled the wire free. Lorne went red. You have no authority to alter factory equipment. I have authority to remove a device likely to cause a public disturbance. Thomas hid a smile. At the end of the line were 6 empty pegs where workers hung identity tags during shifts. Chalk names had been wiped from the wall, but not completely. Under the smear I read Ada, Malik, Soren, K, and 2 marks too faint to recover. Below the pegs sat a wooden crate stenciled Medical Rejects. Inside lay 6 pairs of gloves. Each right palm had been cut away. I picked up 1 pair. The cut was clean, made with shears, not torn by wear. Why retain dismissed workers' property? I asked. Lorne had followed us. Contaminated equipment. Why remove the palms? Ask the infirmary. I am asking you. And I have production to restore. A warning whistle sounded outside. 1 long blast, 2 short, pressure at the cordon. We ran. The cause was a bread cart. It had tried to cross the ammunition road, found the crowd in its way, and overturned when the horse shied. Loaves rolled into the gutter. Hungry people surged. A company guard saw the movement through the gate and fired over their heads. The crowd answered with iron. Tools struck the gates. Windows shattered. Someone threw a smoking brazier. It landed beneath a company wagon loaded with grease and packing straw. Irina's constables held their line, batons out. The workers were not trying to reach them yet. They were trying to reach Lorne. Petra climbed the gatehouse steps. "Back!" she shouted. "Powder store behind that wall, you fools!" A stone caught her above the eye. She remained standing. The company guards leveled rifles through the upper windows. I drew my revolver and pointed it at Lorne. "Order them down. They are defending church property. They are aiming through church workers at church enforcers. Order them down." He hesitated. Tomas placed his whistle between his teeth and gave the military signal. 3 descending blasts. It was a bluff. No soldiers waited around the corner, but Lorne did not know that. "Down!" the overseer shouted. "Hold fire!" Father Pell and Selwa dragged the burning brazier from beneath the wagon. Irina opened a narrow channel towards the spilled bread and ordered the baker to distribute it 1 loaf per family. Giving a hungry crowd something to count was often more useful than giving it an instruction. I climbed the trough again with blood running from a cut on my chin. "The press on line 7 is unsafe," I shouted. "The quota is suspended pending mechanical review." Lorne seized my coat. "You cannot—" I struck his hand away. "The first shift resumes at the old quota. No disciplinary deductions until the review. The 6 missing workers become a custody inquiry under my seal." Petra looked at me through blood. "And the names?" "No further removal without a ward constable present." It was not justice. Justice was too expensive for street issue. It was enough to make 400 tired people consider breakfast. The shift bell rang at the 8th hour. Workers entered in groups of 20, watched by my constables. Some spat at our boots. Some touched the cross over the gate. Line 7 remained idle. Lorne signed the temporary order with such pressure that his pen split the paper. I arrested Petra Knoll for unlawful assembly. The crowd began shouting again until she raised 1 branded palm. "Go to your stations," she told them. "Make him right where I go." In the prisoner wagon, she sat opposite me while Thomas cleaned the cut over her eye. "You promised an inquiry," she said. "I promised the 6 would become 1. Different words. Usually." She watched me fill the transfer chit. Name, Petra Knoll. Charge, unlawful assembly, obstruction of vital production. Health, ambulatory, head wound minor. Property, 1 ledger, 1 glove, prayer token, 3 ration slips. At final destination, I wrote 3rd Ward holding. The 5-point mark waited below my writing. Petra saw it. All color left her face. "Where did you get that?" "Central issue." She reached for the paper. Thomas caught her wrist. "Do not send me with that mark. It is a printer's device. That is what they put on the van. Which van? The one that took the 6. She twisted her branded hand towards me. That is what they put on us. At the office, Berenice had no record of Central Labor requesting prisoners from Foundry 32. Neither did District Military Custody, the Factory Tribunal, the Infirmary, or the Penitential Labor Bureau. 6 people had been arrested by an authority with the correct seal and no office. Captain Hesse read my preliminary report without expression. You suspended a quota. A press safety issue suspended it. Your report says you removed the wire. The wire was the issue. Lorne has filed a complaint. Then his pen still works. Hesse looked at the blue transfer chit attached to Petra's property envelope. Why is she not going to District Tribunal? She is a witness in an unauthorized transfer. She is a labor agitator. She can be both. He tapped the 5 short lines printed in the corner. His damaged hand withdrew. It was a slight movement. I might have missed it if I had not spent 14 years watching men decide what not to say. Where did you get these forms? He asked. So says Central Custody. He rang for Berenice. She entered with her ledger already open. Hesse requested the issue record. She showed him a receipt signed the previous evening by a courier whose name none of us recognized, Brother Avron, Office of Consolidated Detention. There is no such office, Hesse said. Berenice adjusted her spectacles. There was enough of one to have a stamp. Destroy the remaining stock. On what disposal code? Spoiled stationery. It is not spoiled. It is now. Hesse tore Petra's chit in 4 pieces, not 5. Rewrite her on standard paper, he said. Send her to District Tribunal before Vespers. The missing workers belong to Central Labor. Remove them from your report. On whose instruction? Mine. Why? His eyes rose to mine. Because the shells are moving again, Draus. That is the part of this morning for which anyone above us will have gratitude. 6 citizens are not your prisoners. They may have been abducted. Then pray Central Labor knows more than we do. He handed back the report. I removed the paragraph. An enforcer who refused every dishonest order did not remain an enforcer long enough to prevent honest deaths. That was what I told myself. It was not entirely false, which made it useful. Petra was transferred before Vespers on an ordinary white chit. I watched the district wagon leave. Thomas went with it and saw her delivered. He brought the receiving clerk's signature back for Berenice. The ledger Petra carried should have gone into tribunal evidence. When Berenice opened the property envelope, it was gone. In its place lay 6 right-hand glove palms, each cut neatly around the 5-point burn. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. That is how corruption survived in New Antioch, not through concealment, but through the arrival of the next emergency. A pilgrim child fell into a lime vat. 2 artillerymen robbed a shrine. A horse died in the western gate and blocked supply wagons for 9 hours because 3 offices disputed ownership of the carcass. We arrested a counterfeit priest who sold remission from sins not yet committed. We searched 9 rooms for a missing reliquary and found it beneath the bishop's bed, where his cat had given birth inside it. Foundry 32 returned to the old quota. Petra Knoll received 30 days in penitential laundry and vanished into the ordinary machinery of punishment. Lorne's complaint against me moved upwards and lost interest. I searched the custody registers in my spare hours. There was no Brother Avron, no Office of Consolidated Detention, no matching van in the southern gate log. The central duplicating office denied printing blue transfer chits. Their denial arrived on blue paper bearing the 5-line mark. Berenice held it against the lamp. No cross watermark, she said. Same stock, same lie. She folded the denial into her private ledger. You keep a private ledger? I asked. I keep accurate ledgers. Privacy is a consequence. I told her about Hesse's reaction to the mark. She removed her spectacles and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Captain Hesse has served 32 years. Men who serve that long recognize many forms they do not discuss. Was that wisdom? It was arithmetic. Thomas investigated by methods less legal and more effective. He bought drink for transport guards, dice for stable boys, and soup for the night porters at central custody. A week later, he brought me a brass token stamped with the number 817. "One porter remembers the vans," he said. "Gray, no ward number. They come after midnight. Correct seal, correct paperwork, prisoners already listed." Destination? He does not ask. Why give you the token? I won it. At dice? Soup. The token's reverse carried 5 lines around an empty center. "He says the drivers carry these," Tomas continued. "They surrender one for each prisoner." "Who issues them?" He stopped remembering when I asked. "You should have bought better soup." "I bought the best soup in central custody." That is not a meaningful sentence. We placed the token in a property envelope and locked it in my desk. The next morning, it was gone. The lock had not been forced. The envelope remained. Someone had replaced the token with a brass ducat. Tomas held it between finger and thumb. A warning or a bribe. Depends whether we spend it. We gave it to the chapel poor box. For the rest of that month, a brass ducat appeared in the poor box every morning. Father Orsino Pell came once to ask why. The invitation described it as an evening for the relief of war orphans. Captain Hesse described it as babysitting wolves while they ate. The House of Gilded Mercy belonged to Octavian Sayre, a shipping magnate whose barges carried grain along the Orontes and wounded men back from its depots. His public charities maintained 2 pilgrim kitchens, an orphan dormitory, and half the roof of St. Euphemia's hospital. His private appetites maintained half the vice trade in the cathedral quarter. Men like Sayre were not beyond the law. They were surrounded by so many laws that no single one could reach them. His summer mansion occupied a walled garden above the eastern cisterns, where smoke thinned enough for the moon to appear occasionally. The outer facade resembled a monastery. Pale stone, narrow windows, saints above the gate. Behind it lay heated glass houses, tiled baths, a private theater, and rooms built for purposes no architect had recorded. We were ordered to provide 8 uniformed enforcers at the perimeter and 2 plain-coated officers inside. A previous gathering had ended when an ambassador's son fired a pistol through a painting and killed the ambassador standing behind it. The ambassador had been apologizing to the painting at the time. Hesse assigned Tomas and me. "Observe, prevent public scandal, protect named guests," he said. "From whom?" I asked. "Consequences." He gave me a sealed list, 32 names, many with ranks or ecclesiastical titles. Beside 9 was a red cross. "Those 9 receive priority evacuation." "In a fire?" "In anything." "What are we enforcing?" "The walls." I understood. Nothing forbidden was to enter. More importantly, nothing witnessed was to leave. The quartermaster issued us plain black evening coats and dress revolvers with silvered grips. Mine smelled of another man's cologne. Tomas looked like a coffin attendant who had stolen the coffin. "Lida will want to see me in this," he said. "Lida has seen you before. She will recover." At the gate, Sarah's steward inspected our badges as if judging fish. His name was Evander Quill. He was narrow, silver-haired, and wore white gloves without a single crease. When he spoke, his mouth moved very little. "Weapons remain concealed. Guests are not to be questioned. Servants answer to the house. Any doctrinal concern is referred to Father Pell." "Father Orsino Pell?" I asked. "The same." The priest from Foundry 32 stood in the entrance hall beneath a chandelier made from polished shell casings. His weak eyes recognized me. For a moment, he looked ashamed. Then he smiled. "Senior Constable, a kinder duty than our last. That depends on the orphans." His smile tightened. "The Orphan Fund will benefit greatly." "Will the orphans be attending?" "Fortunately, not." Guests surrendered weapons at the cloakroom and collected masks. Saints for clergy, animals for soldiers, classical heroes for merchants. Several men wore the faces of martyrs whose bones their families claimed to possess. The masks let everyone pretend secrecy while the servants recorded every arrival. I noticed the ledger at once. Mireille Dain held it. She was a young house clerk in a gray dress, perhaps 20, with a white ribbon at her throat to distinguish her from serving staff. Beside each guest's name, she entered arrival time, mask, companions, and the number on a small brass disc issued by the cloakroom. The discs were round, 5 lines pointed inward around their punched centers. Mireille saw me looking and closed her hand over them. "House tokens," she said. "Who made them?" "The house." "That is not who." Evander Quill appeared beside her. "A difficulty constable? An ugly design." Fashion often appears ugly before it becomes compulsory. He directed Mireille towards the next guests. The public portion of the evening was respectable enough to make the private portion possible. A children's choir sang from the gallery. A retired cardinal spoke about sacrifice. Guests bid on paintings made by war orphans, though I later learned professional artists had painted them because genuine orphan work depressed prices. Servants circulated with wine, coffee, roast birds, sugared figs, and small wafers dusted with a blue powder. Father Pell blessed the wafers without touching them. "Narcotic?" Thomas murmured. "Medicinal devotion," I said. "What illness?" "Restraint." At the 9th bell, the choir left. At the 10th, the doors were locked. The guests moved below. A staircase behind the library led into cistern chambers older than the mansion. Serre had tiled them in red and gold. Steam rolled along the ceilings. Lamps burned perfumed oil that made my tongue numb. The first chamber held gambling tables. Men wagered ducats, ration exemptions, labor pardons, and sealed packets of military petrol. At one table, a colonel lost a field hospital's winter coal allocation to a spice importer and signed the transfer while everyone applauded. The second chamber held confession booths with the dividing screens removed. Actors dressed as priests listened while guests described invented atrocities. If the actor appeared shocked, the guest won. If the actor laughed, the house won. In the third, 2 debtors fought with blunt knives inside a circle of salt. This was illegal under 6 ordinances. The magistrate responsible for 4 of them stood at the edge of the circle, betting on the smaller man. Thomas watched my face. "The walls," he reminded me. "I remember." Remembering became harder as the night continued. In a side salon, petitions were auctioned without being called petitions. A clerk from the military exemptions office sat behind a green curtain while guests bid for sealed ivory plaques. One plaque would remove a son from a trench draft. Another would change a factory's classification from essential to charitable, cutting its shell quota in half. A third granted permission to import 600 barrels of lamp oil without tithe. The auctioneer described these things as spiritual benefices. I recognized one bidder, Councillor Severac, because I had guarded his house after a food riot the previous winter. He purchased 3 labor exemptions. 2 months earlier, he had signed the revised quotas that made Foundry 32's dismissals possible. "Write down what you see," I told Thomas. He tapped his temple. "Safer here. Until wine damages it. Then the truth will become more interesting." Evander Quill approached with 2 glasses on a tray. "Your officers appear uncomfortable." "We are standing. You are witnessing private agreements among contributors to the city's defense. I have arrested men for selling ration places in a bread queue. Those men had no authority to sell them. That makes this cleaner?" It makes it administration. He offered me a glass. I did not take it. Quill lowered his voice. The House appreciates discretion materially. An evening duty supplement has been prepared for every officer outside. For senior personnel, Mr. Sayre prefers something more useful than money. Better rooms, school placement, medical priority for a dependent. I have no dependent. Everyone has one eventually. Is that an offer? It is gratitude. Gratitude is given afterwards. Only when it is sincere. He left the glasses on a table beside us. Thomas waited until he had gone. School placement would be useful. His daughter, Anka, was 6. The parish school in their quarter had 70 children in one room and a roof that leaked onto the catechism shelves. There was a convent school near the northern wall which accepted the children of officers and benefactors. Thomas had applied twice. Do you want it? I asked. He watched Quill move through the guests. I want her to have it. Different answer. That is why it hurts. We stood in silence while the military clerk sold a family's winter coal allotment to a manufacturer of devotional buttons. At the next table, sealed pardons were being used as gambling counters. The documents had blank spaces where names should go. A guest who lost heavily could write another person's name into his salvation. One pardon slipped to the floor. I picked it up. Its seal was genuine. The authorizing signature belonged to a tribunal canon who had lectured our ward on inflexible justice 2 weeks before. A woman masked as St. Agnes held out her hand. That is mine. Whose sentence does it remit? I have not decided. Then no one has been judged worthy of it. Worth has nothing to do with judgment. She pulled the pardon from my fingers and tucked it into the front of her dress. Under ordinary circumstances, contempt directed at an enforcer invited a cell. Here it invited laughter from a bishop, 2 colonels, and a man who owned the cell doors. I saw Thomas watching me. Young officers believed the worst corruption was money changing hands. Older officers knew the true corruption occurred when a man learned exactly how much indignity he could swallow without appearing to chew. We continued our circuit. In a smoking room lined with saintly icons, an ordnance quartermaster displayed detonators in velvet cases. Guests selected them for private hunting parties beyond the inner wall. Each detonator had been stamped for frontline issue. One still carried a smear of packing grease from the arsenal. Those are military stores, I said. The quartermaster blew blue smoke past my shoulder. Condemned surplus. They were manufactured last month. Standards move quickly. Show me the condemnation order. His smile did not change, but the room quietened around us. Thomas shifted close enough that our sleeves touched. It was the signal we used before arrests. I have your right side. Then Father Pell entered. Senior Constable, may I speak with you? He guided us towards an alcove before I answered. Those items have been released under chaplaincy authority, he said. Chaplaincies condemn explosives now. The donors support frontline morale. By taking detonators away from the front? By funding replacements. Before or after the soldiers discover they need them. The priest's weak eyes hardened. You are here because men of influence require confidence that their charitable activities will not be mistaken for common vice. Common vice looks remarkably similar. Common vice takes, this house gives. Behind him, a servant carried a tray of blue wafers into the knife chamber. Another carried bloodied towels out. It gives itself exemptions, I said. New Antioch is besieged, Constable. Its defense depends upon networks of private obligation you are not placed to understand. Grain moves because one merchant owes another. Hospitals remain heated because officers grant favors outside the printed code. Pilgrim kitchens open because men like Sere are permitted appetites less disciplined citizens could not survive. So sin is a tax bracket. Sin is a theological matter. Convenient. He stepped nearer. Wine sweetened his breath. You believe you are preserving integrity by making yourself objectionable. You are merely threatening arrangements that feed people you never see. I thought of the 400 workers outside Foundry 32. I thought of Lorne saying the same in a different coat. "Did Captain Hesse tell you to speak to me?" Father Pell's silence answered first. "Your captain asked that the evening pass without embarrassment," he said. "He also mentioned Constable Rill's school petition." Thomas became very still. "Leave his family out of this," I said. "His family is why he serves." Pell pressed a folded card into Tomas's hand. The seal of the Northern Convent School shone in red wax. Tomas stared at it. It was not an offer now. It was a fact. Refusing it would no longer leave his daughter where she had been. It would actively return her there. "Keep it," I told him. His eyes rose to mine. "Keep it," I repeated. "And remember who believes they purchased you." He put the card inside his coat. Father Pell smiled sadly, as if another point of doctrine had been demonstrated. 20 minutes later, we passed the military detonators again. The velvet cases were gone. I did not ask where. That omission remained with me longer than many things I did. The smaller debtor slipped. His opponent cut his cheek to the bone. Guests cheered. I found Serre in a gallery above the pit, wearing the gilded mask of St. Michael. He was shorter than I expected, soft around the jaw, with delicate hands covered in rings. "Senior Constable Draus, is the entertainment secure?" "A man is being maimed. They volunteered. For debt remission. Most service begins in debt. Knife bouts require a license." He showed me a folded document sealed by the Office of Public Morale. It authorized controlled displays of penitential courage for charitable subscription. "The knives are not controlled. Neither is courage." I could have stopped the bout. I could have arrested the fighters, the organizer, perhaps Serre himself. By morning, the fighters would be charged, the organizer would pay a fine, and Serre would possess my badge in a velvet box. The smaller debtor went down. I ordered the house physician into the circle. The guests booed. Serre did not object. He had learned that small mercies strengthened the appearance that everyone was there by choice. "You are a practical man," he said. "I am standing in a cellar while a saint watches men gamble with hospital coal." "Exactly." He touched my sleeve with 2 fingers. "Captain Hesse spoke well of you." "When?" "Before you arrived." Something cold moved through me. "What did he say?" "That you understood the cost of order." Across the gallery, Father Pell watched us. When our eyes met, he turned away. Shortly before midnight, Mirelle Dan found me beside the servant's stair. She carried an empty wine tray. One glass had broken and blood ran from her thumb into her cuff. "There is a woman in the blue room," she said. "What woman?" "A factory woman." "Guest?" Mirelle nearly laughed. "No. Name?" "I don't know. They call her Ash Saint." "Who is they?" She looked towards the gallery. "If you come with me, come now." I signaled Tomas, but a drunken artillery officer had chosen that moment to demand his confiscated pistol. Tomas mouthed, "Go." Mirelle led me through the kitchens, where servants scraped whole birds and untouched loaves into swill tubs. We passed a laundry room, then descended a narrower stair cut into bare stone. "Why tell me?" I asked. "Because your name was on the list." "What list?" She stopped. For the first time, I noticed the skin beneath her white throat ribbon. 5 thin scars angled inward around an untouched center. She pulled the ribbon higher. "The list they gave the house." "Who gave it?" "The men with the gray vans." Footsteps sounded above. Mirelle hurried on. The blue room was blue only because the lamp glass had been colored. Its light made skin look drowned. Cushions covered the floor. Brass incense bowls smoked beside a low platform. On the platform lay Petra Knoll. Her head had been shaved. Her branded right hand was fixed palm up in a gilded clamp. She wore a white shift stained beneath the arms. A small silver funnel had been strapped over her mouth. For one foolish second, relief outweighed horror. "Petra!" Her eyes opened. She recognized me. Then she began trying to scream through the funnel. I cut the straps. A clear syrup ran from the funnel onto the floor. Mirelle brought water. Petra struck the cup away and crawled towards the wall. "Don't let them take my name," she gasped. Who brought you here? Laundry, then van. They ask questions. Who? No faces. Why are you here? She stared at Morel's throat. Same as her? Morel went still. Petra reached up and tore the ribbon free. The mark on Morel's neck was not a scar. It was a brand, newly healed. They make the guests choose, Petra whispered. Useful, faithful, strong. They choose where we go. The door opened behind me. Evander Quill stood there with 2 house guards and Father Pell. The guards carried short clubs. The priest carried nothing. This room is private, Quill said. I drew my revolver. So is my conscience. People enter it anyway. The guards stopped. Father Pell looked at Petra and crossed himself. She is under medical supervision, he said. She was sentenced to laundry. Her sentence was commuted. To what? No one answered. Petra seized my coat. Don't let the priest write it. Pell's face collapsed by a fraction. Write what? I asked. Quill said, The woman is a volunteer in a program of moral reclamation. Mr. Serre's charitable foundation receives selected prisoners, treats their deficiencies, and places them in useful service. With funnels? Withdrawal medicine? With clamps? Some patients resist treatment. Where is the authorization? He held out a pale blue transfer chit. Petra Knoll's name appeared in a hand I did not know. The charge was unchanged. The receiving authority read, Gilded Mercy Reclamation House. The final destination had been left blank. In the lower corner, 5 lines leaned towards an empty center. Who transferred her? I asked. Your office, Quill said. We sent her to district tribunal. The document disagrees. The document is false. It bears Captain Hess's seal. It did, not merely the ward seal. Hess's personal device, a tower with 4 windows. I thought of his damaged hand drawing away from the mark. Morel whispered, He knows. Quill glanced at her, and in that glance I saw the shape of her remaining life. Morel Dane is coming with us, I said. House staff answer to the house. She is a witness in a custody inquiry. There is no inquiry. There is now. Quill smiled without warmth. Your captain said you were practical. He exaggerates. The music above us stopped. Then came a sound like a great sheet tearing. Dust fell from the ceiling. The blue lamps swung. Somewhere upstairs, glass shattered and guests began to scream. Thomas's whistle gave 3 urgent blasts. I ran. A procession had reached the mansion. They called themselves the Penitents of the Uncovered Wound, 300 pilgrims from the eastern hostels who believed concealed sin was the route by which hell entered human communities. Someone had pushed handbills beneath hostel doors describing the mock confessions, narcotic wafers, and debtor bouts in exact detail. The handbill named 3 attending priests and promised that a desecrated relic would be unveiled at midnight. The pilgrims arrived carrying hammers. Our perimeter constables barred the gate. Guests crowded the entrance hall demanding carriages. Someone had fired from an upper window. A pilgrim lay dead in the garden with half his face missing. The house was now a sealed vessel containing armed servants, drunken officials, illegal goods, and enough public scandal to damage half the ward. Who fired? I asked Tomas. Everyone says nobody. Useful. They've begun climbing the east wall. Outside, pilgrims chanted, Uncover! Uncover! Serre descended the main staircase in St. Michael's golden mask. Remove them. With 10 officers. My guards will assist. Your guards caused this. Then cause something larger. He meant troops. If I called the military, they would clear the garden with rifles. If I did not, the pilgrims would enter and discover enough genuine corruption to turn riot into crusade. Father Pell emerged behind me. He had left Petra below. "Is there a relic?" I asked. "Not exactly. That is a clerical phrase for yes." His eyes moved towards the private theater. "We found the relic on stage. It was meant to be the evening's final entertainment, a wax replica of a revered martyr's severed head mounted on a silver dish. A comic actor in bishop's robes was to question it about which guest had committed the most inventive sin. The head had been made with real human teeth. The pilgrim's handbill claimed it was authentic. "Destroy it," I said. Sayre appeared in the aisle. "It cost 200 ducats. "Then it will burn expensively." I smashed the wax head with a chair. Tomas poured lamp oil over the pieces and set them alight in the fireplace. Sayre watched his property melt. "Now open the front doors," I said. "They will kill us." "Not if you give them a better lie." We brought Father Pell onto the balcony above the gate. I stood beside him in uniform. Tomas held up the silver dish, empty. Pell told the crowd that the house had received warning of a planned desecration and that church enforcers had seized the false relic before it could be abused. He praised the penitents for their vigilance. He announced that Octavian Sayre would donate 500 ducats to cleanse the eastern hostels of hidden sin. I watched Sayre when the amount was named. That was the nearest I came to seeing him suffer. The pilgrims demanded entry. Pell told them the evidence had already been placed under doctrinal seal. They demanded the guilty. Pell gave them the actor. I did not know he intended to do that. House guards dragged the man into the garden through a side gate. He still wore the bishop's robes. The pilgrims fell upon him before I could reach the stairs. By the time we forced a passage, he no longer had a face. The crowd dispersed with strips of his costume carried as trophies. Sayre's guests escaped through the rear garden in laundry carts and coal wagons. The hospital kept its coal because Tomas stole the colonel's signed transfer from the gaming table and burned it with the wax head. Order was restored. That was the official phrase. Below the house, the blue room was empty. Petra had gone. So had Morel. The gilded clamp remained open on the platform. Beside it lay 2 pale blue transfer chits, both signed by Captain Hesse. Petra Knoll, Morel Dain, final destination blank. Tomas searched the cellars and found a service tunnel opening onto the eastern cistern road. Wheel tracks ran through spilled ash. One of our perimeter constables remembered a gray prisoner van leaving during the riot. Its driver had shown him a central seal and a list of names. "How many passengers?" I asked. "Could not see." "Did you record the plate?" "It had none." "Did you ask why?" He looked ashamed. The paperwork was correct. Inside the tunnel, I found Morel's white ribbon. Tied within it was a small brass cloakroom disc. 5 lines pointed towards its center. The number stamped beneath them was 81 unseen, the same number as Thomas's token. When I returned to the ballroom, servants had begun cleaning. Blood vanished beneath sawdust. Broken glass went into baskets. Guests' masks were burned in a garden furnace. Evander Quill stood at the entry ledger, removing pages with a razor. I took the ledger from him. "House property," he said. "Evidence. Of what offense?" I looked around the room. There were too many answers. That was his protection. "Obstruction of a church enforcer." "By whom?" "You." For the first time, his composure cracked. I arrested him. We reached the ward office at dawn. Hesse was waiting. He looked older than he had the day before. A sealed message lay on his desk beside 4 untouched cups of chicory. "Release Quill," he said. "He obstructed an inquiry and participated in unlawful prisoner transfers." "There is no inquiry." "There are now 8 missing people. Draus, your seal is on their chits." Thomas placed the 2 blue forms on Hesse's desk. The captain did not touch them. "Seals are copied," he said. "Then report the forgery." "To whom?" "Central custody." Something like pity entered his face. "You still believe offices are places," he said. I waited. He opened the sealed message and turned it towards me. It was an order from the Archbishop's Civil Secretariat. All events at the House of Gilded Mercy were classified as matters of protected morale. No arrest, property seizure, witness statement, or casualty record could be retained without doctrinal review. Octavian Sayre's foundation was commended for cooperation. The dead actor was identified as the sole instigator. At the bottom, beneath the Secretariat seal, 5 ink lines pointed inward. "Release Quill," Hesse repeated. "And the ledger?" "Burn it." "Have you read it?" "No." "Then how do you know?" His damaged hand closed on the edge of his desk. "Because I have worn that badge longer than you." I should have obeyed. Instead, while Tomas released Quill, I carried the ledger to the evidence furnace and removed 3 pages before feeding the rest to the fire. I chose them because they contained cloakroom numbers 819 through 819. Number 817 had been issued to no guest. Beside it, Morel had written 8 names. The first 6 were the missing workers from Foundry 32. The 7th was Petra Knoll. The 8th was Morel Diane. Below them had been a 9th line. Someone had scraped it away so hard that the nib had nearly cut through the paper. All that remained was the impression of letters I could not read, and beneath them, a date 3 weeks in the future. I folded the page inside my coat. Outside, the first factory bells began to ring. The guns answered beyond the walls. New Antioch woke around me, hungry, righteous, and perfectly capable of swallowing another day. Captain Hesse entered the furnace room. He looked at the burning ledger, then at my empty hands. "All of it?" he asked. "All of it." For a long moment he studied my face. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. "There is sewer work tonight." The sewer warrant arrived 9 days after the feast at the House of Gilded Mercy, folded around a transfer chit that did not belong inside it. By then I had learned that mistakes in an enforcement office were rarely mistakes. A clerk might miscopy a house number, transpose 2 dates, or send an arrest order to a precinct whose boundary ended 1 street short. Those were ordinary failures, born of bad light and too little sleep. Papers from the sealed desks failed differently. They appeared where they should not, carried signatures no one remembered making, and vanished as soon as a curious man asked who had delivered them. The chit named "No Prisoner." In the space provided for identity, someone had drawn a short horizontal stroke. The destination was Receiving Vault 5. The authority was marked with the same 5-point figure I had seen burned into the foundry workers and upon the servant at the House of Gilded Mercy. I copied it before reporting it. That was my first deliberate breach of procedure. I did not steal the original. Theft could be proved. I laid a thin sheet of requisition paper over it, rubbed the side of a pencil across the marks, and returned both documents to their folder. The copy showed less than I hoped, and more than was safe. The 5 points, the vault number, and the lower half of an authorizing stamp whose words had been cut away. My orders concerned a heretic called the Drain Reader. He had gathered a congregation under the Tanner's Quarter, in chambers left from the old city and connected to the municipal sewers by collapsed cisterns. Informants said he preached without vestments, denied the virtue of necessary suffering, and kept written lists of citizens who had been taken by church officers. The last offense interested my superiors more than the first 2. I was given 6 constables, 2 sewer wardens, and Sister Elske Fenn from the Office of Doctrinal Hygiene. Elske was a spare woman in a waxed gray habit, with a scar crossing her mouth from one cheek to the other. She counted doorways beneath her breath and never stepped across running water without touching the iron crucifix sewn inside her sleeve. Thomas was not among the 6. Hesse had reassigned him to northern school traffic that morning, a duty so gentle it might have been a reward or a warning. The convent had accepted Anka 2 days after Gilded Mercy. Thomas had not told me whether he returned Pell's card. I did not ask. That was how favors became part of a man's uniform. "You have dealt with subterranean sects?" I asked while we checked equipment. 3 genuine, she said. 11 frightened families. 1 tax association. Which were the dangerous ones? The frightened families. Genuine heretics know they are hunted. Ordinary people still believe innocence is a defense. Our senior sewer warden was Joran Caith, whose municipal coat had been patched so often no original cloth remained. He carried a brass air lamp, chalk, a sounding pole, and a ring containing 37 keys. He could tell which quarter lay overhead by tasting condensation from a wall. His apprentice, Torvin Sevrain, was 17 and claimed to be 20. Torvin tied a red cord at every junction, not to mark our route, but because his mother had taught him that red thread confused things born without names. At the descent grill, Keith made every man empty his pockets. "Loose coin wakes in the drains," he said. One constable laughed. Keith held out his hand until the laughing man surrendered 2 brass farthings. We entered shortly before Complin. New Antioch was built in layers because every century distrusted the work of the one before it. The visible streets belonged to the fortress city. Stone drains, iron mains, inspection wells, sluices wide enough for a man to stand in. Beneath those ran the broken watercourses of ancient Antioch, rebuilt after fire, siege, earthquake, and sack. Deeper still were channels whose builders had left no inscriptions, only fitted black stones and gradients too precise for our engineers to explain. The first level smelled of lye, hides, lamp oil, and human waste. Tannery runoff moved beside us in a sluggish brown stream. Rats watched from brick shelves above the water. The constables wore iron half-masks stuffed with vinegar cloth, which kept out the flies and made every breath sound accusatory. Keith led. Torvin followed with the cord. I came third, with Elska behind me and the constables in pairs. Our orders required us to announce lawful entry at any inhabited chamber, secure writings before weapons, and preserve at least 1 sect member for examination. In practice, sewer arrests became shootings because men in dark rooms did not display their hands quickly enough. We found the first circular mark after 300 paces. It had been drawn in white grease on the brick, not branded into flesh. 5 short lines met at a center no wider than a nail head. Keith raised his lamp and studied it. "Not a warden's sign." "Direction?" I asked. "Perhaps." Elska touched one point with a gloved finger and smelled the residue. "Tallow," she said. "Consecrated. Pilgrims use blessed fat on their boots. This has myrrh in it. Ordnance chapels use myrrh." One constable asked why ammunition priests would mark a sewer. No one answered him. Keith found a second sign 40 paces farther on, nearly hidden behind the scale of a leaking steam main. This one had been scored into the brick with a 3-edged tool. He measured the cut with his thumbnail and said it was fresh. "The runoff has not softened it. Week old at most." "Our informant's report was filed yesterday," Elska said. Then someone marked the way before anyone officially knew there was a way. We followed the line of the wall until it ended at an iron inspection door. The warden's plan showed nothing behind it but packed earth. Keith tried 12 keys before one entered. It turned halfway and caught. Torvin knelt with his lamp. Someone had packed the keyway from the other side with wax and black hair. "A ward?" one constable asked. "A delay," Keith said. "Wards require faith. This requires us to waste time." He heated a probe and worked the obstruction out a strand at a time. While he did, Elska made us inspect the ceiling, floor, and side channels for wires. We found none. The door itself was the trap. When Keith opened it, tannery water under pressure struck the opposite wall and poured ankle-deep around us. The air lamps did not change. The water carried no poison. It carried paper. Hundreds of narrow strips spun around our boots. I caught one against the wall. It was the upper half of a prisoner transfer receipt. The name had dissolved. The destination remained legible. Receiving Vault 5. Elska snatched 3 more pieces from the flow. Each came from a different form series. One belonged to a hospital, one to the provost, one to a charitable hostel for unaccompanied pilgrims. All ended at the same vault. None bore the countersignature required to show that a living person had arrived. "Evidence sacks," I ordered. She looked at me. "The warrant concerns prohibited assembly. The papers lie upon the route to that assembly." That is not what I meant. We both understood. Evidence did not merely prove offenses, it created obligations. Once entered into a precinct register, each strip would require a source, a chain of custody, and a clerk willing to admit that 3 systems had sent people toward a room absent from all 3 maps. I distributed the fragments among 4 sacks, so no single loss could erase them. 5 minutes later, a surge washed Constable Irvin off his feet. We hauled him upright before the current took him into a side drain. The evidence sack tied at his belt was gone. Its cord had not broken. The knot had been cut. No one admitted standing close enough to cut it. From then onward, I kept the remaining sacks inside my coat. The mark pointed away from the route given by our informant. Procedure said we should continue toward the suspected chapel. Instinct said someone had placed the symbol where I, specifically, would see it. I followed the warrant. For another hour, the descent remained ordinary enough to kill us. A rotten walkway broke beneath Constable Isolde Colmert, and only Elska's grip on her harness kept her from the runoff. In a low gallery, we found mustard gas settled in a hollow, pale as old milk beneath the lamp. Keith diverted us through a maintenance tube where we crawled on elbows between hot pipes. Twice we heard movement ahead. Once it was rats. Once it was 3 children collecting candle ends, too frightened even to lie properly. I recorded their names and let them go. At the cistern stair, Torvin stopped. The red cord behind us had gone slack. He pulled. The cord came back cleanly cut. Keith swore and made us close formation. Elska opened the silver catch on her shotgun. I checked each man's lamp and counted 8 flames. From below came singing. It was not infernal chanting. That would have simplified the night. It was the hymn for those taken without farewell, sung in the common form used by families whose dead had vanished beyond artillery lines. The voices were soft, untrained, and numerous. They stopped at the verse where each mourner should speak a name. Then names began. One after another, the congregation recited them into the dark. I knew the 4th. Petra Knoll, the foundry organizer I had arrested. I knew the 9th, the servant from the Gilded Mercy Feast. I had learned her name only in the mansion's hidden rooms. In the sewer, a woman's voice spoke it clearly. Mireille Dain. We descended. The old cistern had been drained and floored with scavenged boards. Perhaps 40 people knelt in a wide circle around an empty chair. There were laundresses, furnace men, 2 wounded soldiers, a clerk still wearing his ink guards, and a pilgrim in a battered iron capirote. No infernal icon stood among them, no desecrated host, no sigil of the Black Grail. The walls were covered with paper, lists. Hundreds of names had been copied in different hands and pinned to the stone with nails, fish bones, sewing needles, and spent cartridges. Beside many names was a date. Beside some, a workplace or precinct. Beside 32, the 5-point mark. Between the lists hung ordinary proofs that a person had existed. A ration card cut in half, a child's boot, an invalid worker badge, 6 wedding photographs browned by sewer damp. One family had pinned up a dinner spoon because it was the only possession the arresting officers had not taken. Beneath it, someone had written, "He stirred his tea with this." The sentence affected me more than the names. A list might still be an invention. A spoon was too useless to fabricate. Elska moved around the chamber without lowering her shotgun. She examined the papers as a doctrinal officer, checking for infernal alphabets, ritual number patterns, inversions of holy texts. I watched the method strip certainty from her. These people had not arranged the names into occult geometry. They had grouped them by street so families could find one another. Keith reached a list on the northern wall and stopped. He removed his cap. "Mathis," he said. The gray-bearded keeper watched him. "You are Joran." "Where is my brother?" "Taken 6 months ago. He died in a drain collapse." "You were given his tools, not his body." Keith crossed the chamber and seized the man by his apron. Constables tensed. unsure which side of the arrest this belonged to. "You wrote that name." "He wrote mine first." The keeper pointed to the empty chair. "Mathis sat there after he came back. He founded this place. When he traced another van, we kept the chair empty until he returned." "Where is he now?" Joran asked. "Officers came carrying an order without a name." Joran released him carefully, which was worse than striking him. He took his sounding pole in both hands and stared at its brass tip as though it were an instrument he no longer knew how to use. A clerk from the congregation explained how Mathis had discovered the pattern. Every missing person generated paperwork in at least 2 offices. The records did not vanish. They contradicted one another. The city hid people not by erasing every trace, but by producing so many traces that no clerk felt responsible for the final one. "A man discharged from hospital is no longer a patient," the clerk said. "A man received for questioning is not yet a prisoner. Between those sentences, he can be anything authority requires." I thought of the blank identity fields. They were not errors. They were spaces in which a human being ceased to have an administrative shape. Movement stirred behind the papered wall. A second man stepped from a recess concealed by hanging lists. He was small, gray-bearded, and dressed in the rubber apron of a drain laborer. Joran made a sound I had not heard from him even when the first body fell. "Mathis!" His brother looked at him once. Whatever passed between them did not need language. Then Mathis Keith turned to me. "Correntin Draus," he said. Every weapon came up. "By authority of the church and the principality," I said, "you are commanded to kneel, display your hands, and submit to examination." "You have already examined us." "Kneel." He did. So did the congregation. That frightened me more than resistance. Elska began the doctrinal questions. Did they affirm the divinity of the Redeemer? They did. Did they reject the thrones and temptations of hell? They did. Had they assembled to conduct a rite not approved by the church? The gray-bearded man looked at the walls. "We assembled to remember." "Memory is not a sacrament," Elska said. "Then why does authority fear it?" Constable Colmert muttered that we should bind them and leave theology for a room with better air. I asked about the marks. The drain reader looked at me for a long while. "You have seen them on the living." It was not a question. "Where are the marked people taken?" "Receiving Vault 5. The constables shifted. Elska's scar tightened across her mouth. "That vault is not on any precinct inventory," I said. "No," he replied. "It is beneath the inventory. He told us the disappeared came from everywhere the city could lose a person without losing production. Strike leaders after agreements, servants released from noble contracts, pilgrims detained following riots, prisoners officially transferred between offices that each recorded the other as destination. Street children entered as unnamed dependents. Fever patients signed out to charitable hospitals that had no beds. For execution? I asked. Some would have preferred it." Before he could say more, Keith's air lamp turned blue. He shouted for masks. A canister rolled down the cistern stair and struck the boards with a gentle metallic sound. Elska kicked it into the old water pit. It burst before it fell, releasing white smoke that climbed instead of sinking. The first constable coughed once, tore off his mask, and began clawing at his tongue. Gunfire came from the upper gallery. The shooting was disciplined. 3-round strings, pause, correction, 3 more, not sect weapons, enforcement carbines. Keith smashed the nearest lamps. Darkness gave us perhaps 5 seconds. I dragged the drain reader behind a brick pier while Colmert and Elska returned fire. Torvin pulled open a drainage hatch with one of Keith's keys. The congregation scattered toward it. "Secondary enforcement!" I shouted. "Identify!" The answer was another canister. This one carried flame. Blessed oil spread across the papered wall and burned white. Names curled black, lifted, and became sparks. People beat at their clothing. A pilgrim ran 3 steps with his capirote blazing before Colmert knocked him down and smothered him beneath her coat. Through the smoke, I saw the attackers descend. Their helmets bore no precinct number. Each breastplate carried the 5-point stamp. They did not fire at us deliberately. They fired through us. That distinction killed Torvin. He had the hatch open and was pushing a child into the drain when a carbine round entered below his shoulder blade. He sat down hard, still gripping the red cord around his wrist. Keith reached him. A second round struck the old warden in the thigh. I shot the nearest masked officer. My bullet hit the lip of his helmet and turned his head. He dropped to one knee, more surprised than injured. For an instant, our eyes met through his lenses. He recognized my face. Then he withdrew. All of them did. Not routed, recalled. The smoke thickened until the cistern became a white box filled with coughing and fire. We escaped through the drainage hatch with 9 members of the congregation. I pulled the drain reader after me by his collar. Elska carried Torvin's shoulders while Keith, bleeding heavily, held his legs. Torvin died before we reached clean air. The drain reader did not. At the surface, an enforcement wagon was already waiting. Its officer presented an emergency transfer chit for our prisoner. Identity, blank. Destination, receiving Vault 5. Authority, 5 points around a nail-sized center. I refused. The officer looked past me to Elska. Sister? Elska had smoke burns across her face. Her veil was gone. She looked at the chit, at the surviving congregation, and at Torvin's body. The prisoner requires doctrinal isolation, she said. He requires medical treatment. The order predates your warrant, Draus. That was how she warned me. Not by opposing the transfer, which would have ended both our careers, but by naming the impossibility. I released the drain reader. As the wagon door closed, he leaned toward me and spoke through the gap. They are not hiding the marked from you, he said. They are showing them to you. The door shut. My official report described an armed heretical sect, accidental fire, unidentified interference, and 1 municipal fatality. The lists had been destroyed before examination. The drain reader had been transferred under superior authority. 3 days later, I checked the detention ledger. No one had entered him. 12 days later, on the date impressed beneath the 9th erased name, the riot began over a finger bone that had never existed. The shrine of Blessed Iovita stood in the pilgrim market, where processions arrived from every nation still able to send believers east. Its relic was said to be the smallest finger of a child martyr killed during the 6th siege. Mothers pressed feverish infants against the reliquary. Soldiers touched cartridges to its glass. Pilgrim prophets preached that the bone twitched before heretic assaults. At dawn on the feast day, a shrine keeper opened the silver box and found it empty. By the time our precinct received the alarm, 600 pilgrims had surrounded the shrine. By noon, there were 4,000. Rumor had accomplished what Rhodes could not. The relic had been stolen by foundry atheists, by a noble collector, by a foreign priest, by refugee clerks, by a heretic who wore an enforcer's coat. Each version arrived already furnished with witnesses. My captain placed me in command of the inner cordon. No firing unless the shrine doors fail, he said. No withdrawal under any condition. The market must remain open. There are 4,000 pilgrims in it. Then commerce is excellent. He gave me 90 constables, 20 wicker shields, 6 water pumps, and written authority to arrest 12 named agitators. 3 names belonged to men already dead. One was Petra Knoll. Knoll vanished after the foundry action. Then arrest her if she appears. Who submitted the list? My captain looked at me with tired disappointment. Your habit of asking where orders come from is becoming visible. I took the list. Crowd control in New Antioch was treated as a branch of engineering. A crowd moved under pressures. It sought openings, flowed around fixed points, compressed at corners, and became lethal where frightened men resisted its weight. Faith made the pressures less predictable but did not abolish them. I divided the market into lanes with produce carts and rope. I placed older constables at the front because young men struck too quickly when spat upon. Water crews guarded the shrine steps. Mounted reserves waited out of sight. Horses frightened pilgrims before they frightened rioters. Every squad had one officer assigned only to watch windows and roofs. Tomas arrived with the Northern Reserve and started toward my line. Hess's adjutant caught his sleeve and sent him to the outer market instead. "Captain's order," the adjutant said. Tomas looked from him to me. Then he touched 2 fingers to his right sleeve, the old signal that meant he could see my unguarded side, even if he was forbidden to cover it. For 2 hours, the system held. The crowd prayed, sang, accused, and waited. Prophets mounted barrels to announce visions. Shrine merchants sold strips of cloth advertised as having touched the absent bone. A woman gave birth beneath an awning and named the child Iovita before the cord was cut. Waiting changed them by degrees. Men who arrived curious found themselves trapped among zealots and began shouting so no one would mistake silence for doubt. Procession leaders competed for the loudest accusation because followers drifted toward whichever prophet promised action. Our informants moved through the mass tying colored thread to probable leaders, but the pilgrims copied the threads as blessings until half the square wore them. At the eastern lane, a baker tried to close his shutters. The crowd called that confession. We reached him before they forced the door and discovered 3 heretic prisoners chained in his cellar. For one dangerous minute, the rumor became true. They were labor details from the wall works, lawfully quartered there under military seal. The baker possessed 7 stamped permits. None mattered to men who had seen horned silhouettes through the cellar grill. I stationed shields at the door and sent for a provost wagon. The wagon came without escort, then refused to cross the market because the driver feared being pulled from his seat. So the prisoners remained while word moved outward. Heretics beneath the shrine, heretics fed by merchants, heretics protected by enforcers. Elska opposed letting the crowd inspect them. They do not want proof, they want proximity. Once close enough, they will make the evidence satisfy them. I was beginning to understand that a riot was not one great madness, it was thousands of small bargains. A frightened man shouted because the men beside him shouted. A thief broke a window because piety made theft invisible. A mother pushed toward danger because everyone behind her insisted holiness waited ahead. Each person lent the next permission, and no one owned the total. At the 3rd hour, someone displayed a white bundle from a roof. The crowd saw bone. I saw a length of wax wrapped in linen. Men surged toward the building. The pressure folded 3 market stalls and drove the inner ranks against our shields. We opened the first water pump. The jet knocked pilgrims down and made the stones treacherous. They rose angrier. Someone threw a bottle. Someone else rang the shrine bell in the alarm pattern used for heresy discovered within sacred walls. Then every bell in the market answered. The riot became religious permission. Pilgrims overturned a confessor's booth and used its panels as shields. A band in iron caparotes charged the western lane with war crosses held flat like battering rams. Women tore stones from a devotional garden and passed them hand to hand. The constables did what they had been trained to do, yielded 3 paces, locked shields, struck arms rather than heads. That mercy lasted 40 seconds. A musket fired from the crowd. Constable Colmert, who had survived the sewer, folded beside me with a dark hole beneath her eye. The front rank answered without orders. 6 pilgrims fell. I struck the nearest constable's barrel upward before his second shot. Other weapons fired along the line, irregular and deafening. The crowd broke away, then stopped when those behind pushed forward. People fell between the 2 movements and disappeared under feet. I ordered the shrine doors opened. It violated every instruction I had received. It also gave the pressure somewhere to go. The western lane collapsed as we moved. A handcart turned sideways and became a barricade. Pilgrims climbed it, fell over its wheels, and dragged constables down with them. One officer lost his helmet. A woman struck him 7 times with a reliquary crutch while calling him brother and begging him to repent. At the doors, the hinges opened inward. Pilgrims pressed from outside so hard that the keeper could not withdraw the bolts. We formed a wedge with shields, forced 3 feet of space and turned the first. The second had bent in its socket. Elska braced a constable's axe against it. When this gives, they will come like water. Then stand clear. There are people in the nave. Move them behind the choir grill. She looked once toward the square, where the crowd compressed and lifted a child above shoulder height to keep him breathing. Then she took command of the evacuation. The bolt broke. The door struck me hard enough to numb my left arm. Pilgrims entered, not running but carried by the weight behind them. The first rank fell. The next walked upon them because it had nowhere else to place its feet. We pulled people sideways by belts and hair. For every person rescued, 3 more crossed the threshold. They flooded into the nave, climbing over pews, tearing hangings down, searching for the thief they imagined. I led 12 constables through the sacristy to secure the reliquary chamber before the mob reached it. The keeper met us with a key and a confession. "There was never a bone," he said. The reliquary sat open on a velvet cloth. Inside, beneath the silver cradle, was a fitted block of dark wood polished by years. "Explain." Blessed Iovita was real. The procession brought ashes after the siege. The ashes were lost in a hospital fire. The archbishop permitted a devotional substitute until authentic remains could be translated. When? 63 years ago. What was stolen this morning? Nothing. He had received an anonymous instruction before dawn ordering him to report the box empty and ring twice. He obeyed because the paper carried a curial seal. The instruction had been collected from him an hour later by an enforcement clerk. Description: gray coat, burn scar on the wrist. 5 points, I thought. The mob reached the nave doors. Wood broke. Voices rolled through the shrine. Elska appeared by the side passage with blood on her sleeve that was not hers. "The tribunal has issued a finding," she said. "Heresy confirmed. 1 suspect identified." She handed me a confession signed by a pilgrim named Vasker Nume. "Where is he?" "In the square." "When was he examined?" "He was not." "Then how did he confess?" Elska met my eyes. "Public necessity." We found Nume bound to the dry fountain. He was perhaps 50, 1 arm missing above the elbow, his pilgrim coat hung with medals from battles I knew only from casualty memorials. The crowd around him screamed for fire. He had been carrying a packet when officers seized him. The packet now rested in my evidence satchel. Inside was no relic. There was another list. 4 names had been written in a narrow clerical hand: Petra Noll, Mirel Dain, the drain reader, whose true name was Joran's brother, Mathis Caith, Vasker Nume. Each name carried a date and a 5-point mark. A 5th line had been scraped away so violently that the paper had nearly torn. "Where did you get this?" Nume smiled with blood in his teeth. "A dying clerk." "What does it mean?" "It means the city has an appetite." The tribunal wanted him displayed at the shrine window, confession read, sentence executed before sunset. A visible culprit would reverse the crowd's pressure. Their anger would stop searching for an object and fasten upon a body. I knew it would work. That knowledge was the worst thing New Antioch had taught me. Nume watched me read the sentence. "Will you tell them the box was always empty?" They would burn the shrine. "Will you tell them I stole nothing?" They would find another man. "Then perform your office." We took him to the balcony above the shrine doors. Tribunal men cleared the bell chamber and ordered my constables below. 1 executioner changed the knot behind his own body. Another fastened Nume's pilgrim coat to something beneath it. I saw both things. I told myself they were ceremony. Elska read the fabricated confession. With each offense, the crowd answered, "Anathema." When she named the theft of Blessed Iovita's sacred bone, 10,000 voices became one. Nume was hanged from the bell frame. The drop was scarcely the length of my forearm. His coat tightened across his chest before the rope drew taut. A painted screen fell across the chamber while tribunal men cut him down. No physician examined him in my presence. The riot ended in 9 minutes. Pilgrims knelt where they had trampled one another and sang thanksgiving. Merchants reopened stalls. The wounded were carried away beneath sheets. Shrine attendants closed the empty reliquary and replaced its glass. Before nightfall, the first pilgrims queued to touch it. The abrupt peace offended me more than the violence. Men who had thrown stones helped bandage the constables they struck. A prophet blessed the dead without asking which side they had occupied. 2 pilgrims argued over ownership of a bloodied paving stone, each certain Nume's shadow had touched it. We counted 38 dead in the market and found 11 more inside the shrine. 3 had no visible injury. They had been held upright after death until the pressure released. The records office demanded the bodies be divided into lawful casualties, accidental casualties, and persons whose participation remained under review. I refused the distinction and was overruled. Colmert's property fitted in 1 canvas envelope, a room key, 2 cartridges, a comb missing 3 teeth, and a letter she had carried for months without posting. I signed the envelope before dried blood glued its flap closed. The shrine keeper asked what he should place inside the reliquary before reopening. "Nothing," I said. "Nothing caused this. A lie caused this. A lie needs a shape." By dawn, he had inserted a sliver of sheep bone. The queue began before morning prayer. At noon, I attended the casualty review. 7 authorities shared the table, and each arrived with a version of the riot that protected its own office. The shrine blamed delayed enforcement. Enforcement blamed unlicensed profits. The tribunal blamed the shrinekeeper's failure to secure the reliquary. The pilgrim liaison blamed foreign agitators, though no foreigner appeared among the dead. I placed the keeper's original statement before them. The tribunal recorder read the sentence declaring that the reliquary had always been empty. He dipped his pen in ink, drew a line through it, and asked the keeper to restate his meaning. The old man looked at me. Then he said the sacred bone had been spiritually present despite its temporary physical absence. Everyone could sign that. The final report found that Vasker Nume, acting under unspecified heretic influence, stole or attempted to steal the relic, spread panic to obscure his escape, and died after making free confession. Constable Colmert's death was entered as martyrdom in defense of sacred property. The pilgrims killed by our volley became casualties of Numa's heretical provocation. The people crushed after I opened the doors were attributed to structural defects in the market. No lie stood alone. Each supported the next until the document became stronger than any witness. I signed only the page recording Colmert's property. My captain signed the rest for me. I kept the list. Back at headquarters, I held it above a low lamp until the scraped fibers darkened. Pressure from the erased writing had marked the sheet beneath the ink. The 5th name emerged 1 letter at a time. Correntin Draus. Once a man finds his own name on a list of the disappeared, ordinary life becomes theater. I reported for duty the next morning. I inspected cells, signed property returns, corrected a constable who had entered confiscated devotional medals under currency rather than personal effects. I ate lentils in the canteen. I listened while my captain described Nume's execution as a model resolution. All day I waited to be arrested. No one came. At dusk, a sealed assignment appeared on my desk. Escort 1 prisoner transport from South Annex to receiving Vault 5. The order named me as commanding officer and sole certifying witness. It supplied a route through service passages beneath headquarters that did not exist on the public plan. At the bottom, in place of an authorizing signature, 5 points met around an empty center. The drain reader had been right. They were showing me. The transport stood in the annex yard, an enclosed iron wagon without exterior markings, drawn by a small diesel tractor because horses refused the underground ramp. 2 masked officers guarded the rear. Neither had a precinct badge. One was the man I had shot in the sewer. A dent marked his helmet rim. 4 received, he said. Names? Not required. They are required for my certification. He passed me 4 transfer chits. Each identity field was blank. I opened the wagon. Petra Knoll sat nearest the door. She was thinner than at the foundry, but alive. Circular burns covered both palms. Beside her sat Morel Dane, the servant from the feast, her beautiful borrowed mask long gone. Mathis Caith stared at me from beneath a bandage stained yellow with infection. The 4th prisoner was Vasker Nume. I had watched Nume hang. The rope bruise remained around his throat. He breathed in shallow clicks. "You died," I said. "Publicly," he whispered. Beneath his torn coat, a broad canvas harness crossed his ribs. The noose had bruised him. The harness had carried his weight. Behind the painted screen, tribunal men had cut him down before the crowd finished its first hymn. No officer reacted. We descended. The ramp beneath headquarters passed the archive cellars, the armory reserve, and the old execution chapel. Beyond the chapel, the masonry changed. Brick became fitted black stone, identical to the deepest sewer channels. Copper pipes ran along the ceiling in groups of 5. Through them came a regular pressure beat, not machinery. Breathing. At the first gate, a clerk counted the chits and ignored the bodies. At the second, a priest tested each prisoner's blood with a silver needle. At the third, we surrendered our firearms and received wax earplugs, white aprons, and identity discs bearing only numbers. The operation had all the marks of permanence: worn steps, polished handles, amendments pasted over older regulations. This was not a desperate experiment assembled during some recent crisis. Generations of clerks had refined it. Receiving Vault 5 occupied a cavern below the headquarters chapel. The machine filled it. 5 iron conduits descended from the roof into a central press shaped like an enormous baptismal font. Around it stood concentric galleries of restraint frames. Men and women were fixed upright in them, arms extended, palms pierced by copper taps. Some worked treadles, some recited litanies from cards, some merely bled. Their blood ran through glass channels into the font, where revolving paddles mixed it with powdered silver, myrrh oil, and fragments of bone. At the far end, pressed but unfilled artillery casings moved upon a chain conveyor. Each shell descended into the press. Each emerged wet with a red-black film. Priests branded 5 points around its driving band, spoke a blessing, and sent it upward toward the filling works, where explosive fuse and final inspection waited. The sound I had mistaken for breathing came from hundreds of restraint bellows drawing suffering through brass reeds. Pain entered the machine as cries and left it as a low harmonic that trembled in the shells. I had seen church laboratories. I knew the Mendelist-operated communicants program used cloned sacred flesh. I knew martyrdom could be weaponized because frontline chapels issued pills that turned a man's death into blast and fire. None of that prepared me for the administrative scale of Vault 5. This was not a hidden altar. It was an industry. The receiving officer took us around the outer gallery before surrendering the prisoners. At each station, a brass board displayed the day's requirement. Field gun shells needed only brief immersion. Heavy artillery demanded longer exposure and a stronger grievance classification. Ammunition intended for blessed sniper rifles was treated individually, 1 cartridge held against one prisoner's breast, while a priest spoke the name of the soldier expected to fire it. Nothing was wasted. Blood exhausted of liturgical value passed into the infirmary works for plasma separation. Hair went to fuse makers. Teeth and small bones were crushed for the baptismal mixture. Bodies that died without sufficient resentment were rendered into industrial fat because, as one notice stated, failure of spiritual yield does not cancel material obligation. The wording had been revised 4 times. Earlier versions remained visible beneath the pasted sheet. We passed a testing room where 5 candidates sat with their hands clamped beneath heated seals. An examiner asked them the same questions at measured intervals. Who harmed you? By what authority? Was the punishment just? Would you forgive it? Gauges rose when the answers carried anger and fell when pain reduced language to pleading. One candidate insisted he was guilty. The examiner struck out his classification and sent him back upstairs. He is released? I asked. Reassigned to ordinary execution. Farther on stood a nursery-sized ward containing 6 empty cots. Their blankets had been folded with exact care. I stopped. Dependents are rarely efficient, the receiving officer said. Their grievance lacks theological comprehension. Rarely. The present regulation discourages intake below 14 unless family separation produces exceptional resonance. He spoke as if this should reassure me. In the calibration chapel, an ordnance priest opened 2 treated shells so I could see the difference. One held only explosive and steel. The other produced a faint whisper when he turned it in his hands. I put in the wax earplugs. The whisper did not diminish. It formed behind my teeth. The priest placed both shells in identical breach simulators and fired them into blocks of material cut from captured heretic armor. The ordinary round flattened and buried itself halfway. The treated round passed cleanly through, leaving the armor's inverted scripture bleeding from its cut edges. "Faith?" I asked. "Not precisely." "Miracle?" "A repeatable miracle is ordnance." He recorded the penetration depth and rang a bell. Clerks adjusted the day's mixture by 1/16th part myrrh. At the center of the floor, workers cleaned spilled blood with salt and sawdust. One hummed a hymn. Another complained that his relief shift was late. They did not avert their eyes from the frames because horror, attended every day, had become employment. A superintendent met me below the galleries. He was an elderly priest in an ordnance apron with clean fingernails and spectacles tied behind his head. "Officer Draus," he said, "your arrival is overdue. Who are these people? Contributors? Prisoners? Legal categories are retained above. Here we classify by yield." He showed me the ledgers because concealment had ended. The program had begun after the 7th siege, when ammunition blessed by ordinary right failed against a heretic engine advancing beneath inverted icons. A single shell washed in the blood of an unjustly condemned prisoner pierced it. Theologians argued over cause. Ordnance officers repeated the result. Innocent suffering, formally administered by lawful authority, produced a spiritual violence that hell could not easily counterfeit. The Church did not require innocence in the pure sense. Purity was rare and difficult to document. It required contradiction. Citizens condemned enough to possess no defenders, yet undeserving enough to retain grievance. Workers punished for demanding survivable quotas. Servants who had witnessed protected sins. Pilgrims betrayed by false accusations. Heretics whose only heresy was memory. "You manufacture injustice," I said. "We harvest what the city produces naturally." Petronol laughed. A guard struck her behind the ear. The superintendent continued as though nothing had happened. The 5-point marks identified candidates who had demonstrated the necessary spiritual response. Transfer chits moved them through administrative gaps. Public deaths were staged when disappearance might create questions. Families received contradictory notices until grief exhausted itself against desks. And the circular burns. Assay marks, minor extractions. We test resonance before committing a candidate. I thought of Petra at the foundry. Morel behind the noble mask, Mathis Caith's lists, Nume beneath the empty reliquary, 4 cases, 4 citizens shown to me. Why? Because Vault 5 requires a new superintendent of civic acquisition. My captain stepped from behind the ledger racks. He wore no armor. He carried my service file. "You were never assigned to discover the program," he said. "You were assigned to demonstrate what you would do when discovery became possible." He opened the file. The foundry strike had tested whether I would favor production over sympathy. I restored the line. The Gilded Mercy Feast had tested whether protected corruption would provoke public disobedience. I preserved the house and its guests. I arrested Quill. "And Ceres' protected guests escaped," Hessa said. "I cut Petra free. I tried to reach the actor. And when you could not, you used his death to hold the gate. We measure outcomes, Draus. Motive merely tells us whether a useful result can be repeated." The sewer tested whether I would fire upon concealed authority to save civilians. I had fired, but then surrendered the prisoner and falsified my report. The reliquary tested whether I could condemn an innocent man to prevent greater disorder. Nume's public corpse was false, but the rope and the choice were real. "You obeyed imperfectly," my captain said. "Perfect obedience is brittle. A man who never doubts understands too little to administer necessity." The 5th name. Yours. Was I marked for the frames? If you failed. The superintendent removed his spectacles and polished them. Every examination requires a control. I looked down at my hands. No circular burns marked them. Then I remembered the fever inoculation issued before the foundry action, 5 needles in a ring pressed into my upper arm. During the fever, a medical clerk had asked 4 questions while pretending to test my lucidity. Who harmed you? By what authority? Was the punishment just? Would you forgive it? The needles had sampled my blood and marked me as compatible. The 4 cases were the true assay. Hesse saw me understand. His damaged hand closed over the file. Why 4 of everything? I asked. The ledgers, the hooks, even the way you tear a chit. He looked toward the 5-point seal on the press. Because after recruitment, a man is entitled to 1 superstition. Perhaps long before. My captain placed 2 documents upon the desk. One was a promotion to Superintendent Enforcer, Civic Acquisition Section. The other was a transfer chit. Identity, Correntin Draus. Destination, receiving Vault 5. Choose, he said. Behind him, the conveyor advanced. Another shell entered the blood font. Somewhere far above us, artillery fired from New Antioch's walls. Several seconds later, dust descended from the cavern roof. I thought of the front. It would have been comforting to dismiss the program as corruption. Corruption served appetite. This served the city. The shells went east. They broke heretic armor, severed infernal flesh, and kept the 77 towers standing. Men in trenches would never know what coated the ammunition they loaded. Families asleep beneath the walls would never hear the voices inside the driving bands. New Antioch survived. That was the argument beneath every argument. If I refuse, I said, you place me in a frame. Yes. And appoint whom? My captain closed the service file. A candidate who has seen less. That answer had been prepared for me because it used my vanity as a chain. I knew more. I cared more. Therefore, I might manage the evil better. Every educated coward is eventually offered some version of that office. Release these 4. No, then the offer is theater. The offer concerns administration, not pardon. Petra raised her branded hands. Ask him how many he needs next month. The superintendent answered without irritation. Current projections require 1,140 contributor equivalents adjusted for the autumn offensive. There were not 1,100 frames in sight. The superintendent followed my glance. This vault is one of 5 treatment nodes. Most candidates give minor extractions and return to ordinary custody. The frames are for high-yield contributors. Senior offices know that the nodes exist. Each knows only the stage it supplies. How long do they survive? Yield varies. How long? 5 days at present extraction. Longer for those assigned to treatals. Considerably less during emergency consecration. Morel spoke for the first time. He wants you to imagine changing the number. I did. Against my will, I began calculating. Lower extraction would extend life but reduce output. Better records might prevent children entering, yet better records would also make acquisition more reliable. Inspections could stop noble houses using the program to dispose of inconvenient servants, but the servants would still come when the program itself required them. The office had entered me before I entered it. Why preserve their names? I asked. You remove them above. The superintendent glanced toward the frames. A grievance without identity loses force. The machine requires each contributor to know exactly who has wronged whom. So even the secret depended upon the truth it destroyed. Names were not mercy here. They were a component. I signed the promotion. Mirelle Diane closed her eyes. Petra Knowles spat at my boots. Mathis Caith began reciting names. Vasker Nume laughed through his ruined throat until the guards dragged all 4 toward the empty frames. My captain handed me the acquisition ledger. Its cover was warm. The first pages contained quota requirements by shell caliber, expected candidate yields, acceptable loss during transport, and districts whose disappearances remained below public notice thresholds. The last section was blank. "Your first duty," he said, "is to reconcile the present intake." There were 4 prisoners before me and 4 blank identity fields. Procedure required names. The superintendent watched. My captain watched. The masked officers watched. I wrote Petra Knoll, then Morel Dine, then Mathis Caith, then Vasker Nume. No one stopped me. I turned the page and wrote the names of the 9 sewer congregants who had escaped through the drainage hatch. I wrote Torvin Sevrain, though he was dead and beyond their machine. I wrote Isolde Colmert, killed by a bullet fired from the pilgrim crowd. I wrote the children we had released in the drains. I wrote every disappeared person I could remember from the papered walls before they burned. My captain rested one hand upon the ledger. "What are you doing?" "Reconciling. These are not present intake. They are unresolved names." The superintendent studied me with an expression I could not read. "Records from this section do not leave the vault," he said. "Then there is no danger in accuracy." That answer pleased someone. I still do not know whom. I signed the bottom of the page with my new title. The 4 prisoners were taken into the galleries. The machine continued. The city did not tremble, nor did heaven open, nor did the lamps reveal some final judgment in their flames. Evil rarely announces itself when entered correctly upon a form. I was given an office overlooking the receiving floor. For the next 7 years I performed my duty. That sentence may condemn me more completely than anything else I have confessed. I reduced child intake. I diverted prisoners whose families possessed enough persistence to ask the same question at 3 offices. I required true names whenever they could be found. I dismissed 2 acquisition officers for accepting bribes from noble houses, then appointed replacements who understood that wealth purchased many things, but should not purchase an enemy's disappearance without contributing something in return. I kept Thomas beneath every acquisition threshold I controlled. He became a ward captain, respectable and careful, and sent Anka through the convent school in a uniform he could never have afforded. Some of his cleanest reports fed my quotas. Neither of us ever spoke of the card Pell put into his hand. I also raised quotas when the eastern batteries ran short. I authorized raids. I manufactured transfer chits. I learned which strikes produced the cleanest grievance, which false heresy charges made pilgrims spiritually volatile, and which protected entertainments yielded servants whose sense of betrayal remained strong after sedation. Under my administration, Vault 5 became more efficient and, in several small respects, less cruel. That is how men like me describe damnation. The ledger in which I wrote those first names was eventually filled. I sealed it and requested another. Before the clerk carried the old volume to the restricted archive, I copied every page by a pressure transfer method Berenice So had taught me years before, when she wanted duplicate arrest records no furnace could entirely erase. The copy exists. If you are hearing this account, then perhaps it left the vault. I made 3 copies, using 3 clerks who never knew they shared a task. 1 vanished. 1 was returned to my desk, unopened. The fate of the 3rd is the only hope upon which this confession can honestly claim to rest. Perhaps I arranged that. Or perhaps the program permitted it because confession, too, creates a useful form of suffering. I have spent enough years beneath New Antioch to distrust any rebellion that meets no resistance. There are nights when I believe I accepted the office to preserve the names. There are other nights when the eastern guns begin firing, the shell tallies fall into order, and I understand that preservation was only the story I told myself so I could hold the pen. I remember every person I entered. That was once my defense. It is now the skill that makes me valuable. Above my desk hangs a blank transfer chit. In the identity field, I wrote my own name long ago. In the destination field, I wrote Receiving Vault 5. It waits there without signature or date. One day I may complete it. One day I may open every gate. Until then, the marked arrive. The press descends. Consecrated shells climb toward the filling works and arsenals. Beyond the walls, the armies of hell gather beneath a sky made black by our guns. And beneath the headquarters of those who keep New Antioch safe, I continue to record the names of everyone the city requires itself to forget.